Chapter 16. The Opera and the Bastille. France, 1784. Her parents had sailed to Saint-Domingue, leaving their beautiful daughter unchaperoned in Paris. There were two reasons Suzette chose not to accompany her family to Saint-Domingue. First, she wasn't fond of her relatives there, especially her aunt's husband. The idea of attending some grand birthday affair at the Cormier plantation was not alluring enough to justify the grueling voyage. However, the real reason she decided to stay had less to do with disdain and more to do with desire. Thomas had been attracted to Suzette for months, but he had never had the courage to talk to her. Eventually, his admittedly pathetic swooning got on Joseph's last nerve, and the Chevalier forced their introduction. They weren't officially courting, her father would never allow that, but with her parents overseas, Thomas and Suzette took full advantage of her sovereignty. Initially, Thomas had been bashful and clumsy around her, but over time he'd grown more suave. Women were, perhaps, not as terrifying as he had originally believed. They weren't in love. Joseph had always warned him never to entertain a woman who had the power to truly take his breath away. But they enjoyed themselves and made quite a glamorous couple. Thomas was handsome, 6 feet tall with frizzy black hair that recalled the curls of the Greeks and Romans. His oval face, thick lips, and skin that was closer to ebony than bronze gave him a very fine figure. Suzette was Creole, blonde and adventurous. Escorting her on his arm made Thomas feel formidable, especially around the more disapproving members of society. But their months of pleasure were drawing to a close. Her parents were supposed to be returning in less than 2 weeks. Thomas wanted their secret season of romance to conclude exquisitely, so he acquired tickets to the Nicolet Theatre. The Chevalier had composed an aria for Monsieur Martini's new opera, Le Doigt de Seigneur, and tonight was the premiere. To avoid gossip from her servants, he had hired a stagecoach to pick Suzette up for the evening. He was dressed in his finest frock coat, with shoes polished to a shine. Unfortunately, the powdered wig refused to stay, so the theater would have to forgive his natural hair. But apart from that, he looked incredibly dapper and was fully prepared to behave with perfect chivalry. As her coach pulled up and Suzette stepped outside in a stunning green dress, Thomas bowed deeply and offered her his hand. "Milady," he said with a casual smile. She blushed and took his arm. After wishing good fortune to the Chevalier on his premiere, they walked proudly toward their seats. Suzette smiled flirtatiously. "I'm so excited." "For the opera?" he asked. "Yes, but being here with you is wonderful too," she replied, her cheeks flush. She looked like she may just be prepared to offer him her maidenhood after the final curtain. It was a pity Thomas was so pious. She tilted her head. "You've become such a bon vivant. I remember watching you at the Academy. I don't think you noticed me back then. You were so reserved. Now?" "How could I ever not notice you?" he replied playfully. Her observations were true. Ever since his famous duel, he had tried to behave more like the Chevalier, to be more free and social, but they weren't the same. Though he acted more like Joseph now, his motives were entirely different. Joseph craved attention. Thomas just wanted the liberty to express his thoughts without being forced to censor himself. The opera itself was a charming comedy, much to Thomas's relief. He disliked the idea of accompanying a lady to a tragedy where the lovers perished painfully. The plot was risque, but amusing. He glanced over at Suzette several times, watching her blush at the more salacious moments. While the audience roared with laughter, Thomas was transfixed on Suzette. Tonight, he wanted to try something new. He wanted to kiss her, though he feared his inexperience might prove embarrassing. As the curtain lowered at intermission, Suzette turned to Thomas. "It is quite charming, is it not?" "It's very Italian for a French opera." He hoped that sounded impressive. He was technically repeating something Joseph had told him earlier, but she didn't have to know that. Yes, she agreed. I do adore a love story. He was about to reach for her hand when a commotion from the box beside them caught his attention. A group of naval officers were gossiping loudly with their dates. Pathetic, one of them was saying, showing herself in public with noir filth. Has she no shame? Thomas felt his blood begin to boil. She mustn't, another soldier chimed in. Who does he think he is? Thomas turned without hesitation and interjected loudly enough for them to hear. I am Thomas Alexandre David de la Pailletterie, heir to the Marquis David de la Pailletterie. Are you talking to us, little man? One of the officers jeered, eyeing Thomas with contempt. I'd appreciate it, Thomas said pointedly, if you would address me with the deference due my title. Do you now? The officer turned to Suzette. There's space right here. Should you prefer better company for the second act? He was rubbing his lap suggestively. I think you are not sufficiently aware that I am not alone. Suzette recoiled and turned desperately to Thomas. Just ignore them, Thomas said through gritted teeth. You like Americans, don't you? Their ringleader had stood up and was now making lewd gestures at Suzette. This was a step too far for Thomas. Apologize to the lady, Thomas demanded. The officer sneered. You really think you can speak to me like that? Thomas leaned forward. You really want to test my patience? Face me without this box between us. I'll throw you straight into the orchestra. The other patrons were beginning to stare, but their feud was interrupted by the tuning of the violins. Thomas was bristling, ready to continue this outside, but Suzette tugged on his arm, desperately urging him to sit. Though the second act was almost certainly wonderful, Thomas did not hear a single note. His mind was now singularly fixated on exacting his revenge against the officers who offended his honor. As the performers took their final bow, Thomas and the officers were locked in a deadly glare. They rose in unison as the doors opened. They outnumber you, Suzette pleaded. You don't need to do this. The men were now laughing and cracking their knuckles menacingly. Have you forgotten who I am? Thomas replied, almost insulted. I'm the finest fencer in Paris. They are officers, she shot back. Thomas scoffed. You assume from their uniforms that they are skilled fighters. I don't even recognize them. If I knew their names, they would have a reputation worth my concern. But they are laughing, she responded nervously. It's a performance, Suzette, no more real than the opera below. How can you be sure? She persisted, tugging at him as he strode toward the exit. The officers had left, and Thomas was intent on catching them. A rogue does not laugh in the same way that an honest man does. A hypocrite does not shed the tears of a man of good faith. All falsehood is a mask, and however well-made the mask may be, with a little attention we may always succeed in distinguishing it from the true face. I don't want you to get hurt, she murmured. He paused briefly at the bottom of the grand stairway. That is kind of you, but I am a man and it is my business to risk my life. He stormed outside to find the officers waiting across the street. Thomas straightened himself up and strode over to where they stood. Quite a performance, wasn't it? The naval officer responded, but he refused to look at Thomas. You know, the opera was ruined for me. The rabble in the audience really brought down the quality. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves. I didn't catch your name earlier, monsieur, Thomas said, loud enough to draw attention on the street. Are you speaking to me? The ringleader asked condescendingly. He turned to Suzette. Keep your lackey in line, mademoiselle. He seems to have forgotten his place. One of the other officers piped up. His name is Jean-Pierre Titon de Saint-Lomain, and you're a fool if you think you can cross him. Shut up, Blinken, Jean-Pierre snapped. Thomas turned to Suzette. I stand corrected. Then he looked back at Jean-Pierre. I have heard of you. You are the clerk, right? Over at the War Offices at Versailles? A desk job? You must be a hell of a swordsman to get a posting like that. Jean-Pierre glared at him. In your country, they put chains on your feet and on your hands. If you dare to say a word, I will have you arrested by the guard and taken to prison. I told you earlier, sir, Thomas snapped back. I am the eldest son and heir of the Marquis Antoine David de la Pailletterie. Jean-Pierre scoffed. So you claim. They let anyone be a Marquis now. This country has really gone to hell. First, the Queen cuddles up with that black composer, and now we have vermin like you running around our streets, calling themselves nobilité. Thomas' expression darkened. If France is suffering, it is only because assholes like you are claiming to serve this country when you only disgrace it. You have gone too far, Jean-Pierre growled, turning to his men. Help me teach this fucking slave a lesson. I'm not sure, Jean-Pierre, Blinken interjected. I've heard of him. He's a legend. He beat the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. I'm not afraid of him, Jean-Pierre snarled. You should be, Thomas said coldly. He turned to Suzette, who was visibly alarmed. Hold my coat, darling. Be careful, Thomas, she whispered. Jean-Pierre's face twisted into a sneer. Ah, now it makes sense. We couldn't figure out why such a beautiful woman would be seen in society alongside filth like him. I figured you were a prostitute. But no, your accent gives you away. You're from the colonies. Leave her out of this, Thomas barked, fury flashing in his eyes. Oh, I'll leave her alone when you kneel and admit to all of Paris that you are nothing but a fucking slave, Jean-Pierre taunted. He stood within an inch of Thomas' face. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Thomas said, his voice low, fists tightening. Kneel, slave, and beg for your freedom, Jean-Pierre demanded. Thomas, Suzette pleaded. Thomas remained steady. I kneel only to God. His patience was hanging by a thread as the officers began to advance. A small crowd gathered in the dimly lit street. Jean-Pierre clenched his fists and with his 3 compatriots began to circle Thomas. He was alone and outnumbered, but he was also observant. His first priority was to protect his back. He let Jean-Pierre shove him against the outer wall of a hat shop. This limited their angles of attack and gave him a solid surface to brace against. Jean-Pierre lunged first, landing a heavy blow to Thomas' stomach. But Thomas allowed it. He wanted Jean-Pierre to feel overconfident. The officer turned to the crowd to gloat. So much for the make-believe Marquis, eh? He turned back to Thomas and moved to strike again. But this time, Thomas slid to the side, causing Jean-Pierre to land his fist directly into the brick wall. As the soldier reeled from pain and shock, Thomas moved on to Blinken to land 2 heavy punches right on the terrified man's face. Blinken was stunned and immediately retreated to tend his bleeding face. The other 2 had not planned for Thomas to be upon them so quickly, but as he marched towards them, Thomas realized that Jean-Pierre had recovered more quickly than anticipated. He ran at Thomas and took another swing, but the blow only nicked him. Jean-Pierre's arrogance did not seem to match his actual level of combat fighting. Meanwhile, Thomas noticed that one officer seemed unsteady on his left leg. Thomas went for him next. This man's reflexes were slower than his friend's. The blows Thomas landed were not particularly hard. They were more for distraction until he was able to sweep his foot and upend the man. He hit the cobblestones hard. Meanwhile, Jean-Pierre, who was now breathing heavily, grabbed a cane. Thomas swerved quickly, parrying an attack, which hurled the soldiers into a state of confusion. The cane was a complication. He looked around to find anything he could use to block its blows. Suzette had a parasol. Perfect. He trotted halfway over to her as his attackers regrouped after another quick round of punches. "May I?" he asked quickly. "What?" she stammered. "Your parasol, mademoiselle." Just then, the officers hurled themselves against him, 3-on-1. Thomas was pushed back from their combined mass, but he dropped down and rolled out from under them. They piled atop each other, trying to find where Thomas had gone. Suzette tossed the parasol towards him, but her aim was not particularly true. The lace umbrella landed exactly halfway between Thomas and Jean-Pierre. Thomas rolled towards it on the ground as Jean-Pierre struggled to pull himself out from under the disoriented, hobble-legged soldier who had hit his head on the cobblestones. Thomas grabbed the parasol and pulled himself upright, but as he did, one of his shoes lodged in a drainage hole. It pulled off his foot, leaving Thomas unbalanced. Shoe or not, he now had a weapon. It was more delicate than the steel he usually worked with, but odds were at least moving back into his favor. Blinken re-entered the fray, blood still pouring down his face. Thomas, parasol in hand, deflected his clumsy attack. Jean-Pierre, who was sore and exhausted, ran headlong at Thomas, cane raised high above his head. But Thomas easily sidestepped the lunging man, whose fury was quickly rising to a point of reckless abandon. The evasion sent Jean-Pierre colliding into Blinken, who stumbled and fell hard on the street. As they fell, Jean-Pierre dropped the cane and it went rolling towards the off-balance officer. The man picked up the ebony cane and took a few strikes at Thomas. The makeshift weapons clashed 3 times before Thomas Alexandre was able to deflect the cane with precise wrist movements perfected over years of training. Thomas stepped inside the man's guard and tripped him. The parasol unfurled, distracting the soldier. It was the same sensation as how a person cannot help but watch the peacock present its tail. With the open parasol, Thomas hooked the cane and twisted it out of the man's hand. The cane flew off to the side, but Suzette ran in, grabbed it, and threw it back to Thomas. This time her aim was improved. Now Thomas had 2 weapons, unconventional as they may be. Jean-Pierre turned on him, fuming with anger, but he hesitated before rushing in against Thomas. It was just the window needed. Thomas knocked Jean-Pierre right in the midsection, once from the left with the mangled parasol and once from the right with the cane. The remaining 2 soldiers charged at Thomas from different directions. Thomas met their fists, dropping his weapons. They tussled for a moment, and Thomas was knocked painfully to his knees, but he planned his fall against the other 2 men, who made an audible thump as they hit the ground below him. The gathered crowd gasped. He couldn't see clearly, but one of them appeared to be cradling his head. It was now just Thomas and Jean-Pierre again. The 2 men paced around each other. The crowd was growing, drawn by the commotion. Jean-Pierre raised his fists, then Thomas lunged. Jean-Pierre evaded him and dealt a swift blow to Thomas' ribs. Thomas coughed, but delivered a quick counterpunch to his gut that sent the man to the cobblestones. Thomas was sore and bruised, but compared to Jean-Pierre, he was far better off. However, Jean-Pierre was relentless. He launched another attack, but Thomas was ready for him. The thud of fists meeting flesh echoed through the street. The fight had progressed quickly, but now all of Thomas' opponents were moving slowly. Jean-Pierre alone seemed determined to continue the fight, but his anger had made him impetuous. Then a voice came out of the crowd. "Want your shoe back?" It was the Chevalier. He tossed the shoe back at Thomas, who caught it effortlessly. Blinken charged once more, and Thomas smacked him across the face with the shoe. The crowd went wild. It may have been an absurd choice of weapon, but that hardly dulled its effectiveness. "Is that all?" Thomas asked confidently. But just then the gendarme arrived. "Halt!" they called loudly, bringing the whole affair to a sudden stop. "What is going on here?" the leader of the police yelled as the other officers began to disperse the crowd. Jean-Pierre stood up, wheezing. This mulatto attacked us. A policeman ran up to Thomas and struck him hard with an ivory-headed ebony baton. That isn't true, Suzette cried. He is lying, officer. The policeman halted his blows. Thomas felt the heavy hand of another gendarme on his shoulder, while a third policeman's hand rested on his pistol, though he refrained from drawing it. Jean-Pierre and his comrades continued their shouting, but their voices were drowned out by the cries of the crowd. The police, unable to make sense of the chaos, arrested all 5 men. I am the heir of the Marquis de la Pailletterie. He will hear of this, Thomas yelled. Silence, barked the policeman, throwing Thomas and the others into a barred prison carriage. It was his first time being arrested. Thomas took small comfort in the fact that they needed 2 carriages for the lot of them, and he had been paired with Blinken, who sat silent and bloodied, too scared to speak as the carts made their way to the Bastille. Once inside, it was all paperwork. The cuffs on his wrists felt cold and heavy. The whole ordeal reminded him of Saint-Domingue. The only consolation was knowing that Jean-Pierre and his cronies wore the same iron restraints. They were all thrown into a cold, damp cell that reeked of mold and urine. Thankfully, Thomas was only there for an hour before a guard came to release him. Suzette must have alerted his father. Antoine would be furious. For a moment, Thomas wondered if staying in the cell with Jean-Pierre was preferable to his father's wrath. Jean-Pierre, who was sitting on the other side of the cell, piped up. You are free. I give you pardon, and you may go. He made an elaborate show of releasing imaginary chains. A manumission. Fuck you, monsieur. I hope you rot, Thomas said as he left his tormentors locked in the cell behind him. They would certainly be out by morning, but he would savor knowing that he got out first. Stepping out of the Bastille, Thomas braced himself to face his father. Instead, he was met by the Chevalier. You paid my bail? Thomas asked, surprised. Didn't have to, the Chevalier said. They were too scared to anger your father. All they required was proof that you were who you said. Then they let you go. Thank you, Thomas said, but Joseph ignored him. That was really dumb, Joseph scolded. I know, but he deserved it. It was hilarious. The shoe, Joseph said, cackling. Thomas chuckled, shaking his head. I couldn't believe it worked. Poor Blinken. I almost feel bad for him. It was idiotic, but brilliant, Joseph admitted, his laughter subsiding. Still, I know what you're going to say, Thomas interrupted, already frustrated at the lecture he could tell was coming. You don't need to prove yourself like this, Thomas. I won, didn't I? Thomas countered. It was luck, Joseph said flatly. It was skill, Thomas shot back. Fine. It was luck and skill. I swear, drunkards and lovers have a protecting deity. But seriously, what were you thinking, taking a white girl to the theater? You introduced us, Thomas retorted defensively. Yes, for private company while her parents were away, not to parade her around society, Joseph snapped back, exasperated. You gave me the tickets for tonight, Thomas argued. I thought you'd invite your father, not her. Your father's support matters more than your boyish whims. My father has no interest in the theater. But I have interest in his patronage. Read between the lines. You bring women to public events all the time. That's different. Everyone knows I'm not trying to marry them, Joseph said dryly. I learned this lesson years ago, but you're naive. You fall in love. I'm not in love with her, but even if I was, why are you always so against it? Thomas asked. Thomas, my friend, you are brave, you are prudent, you have excellent qualities, but women will destroy you. You aren't answering my question. Why are you so opposed to love? Thomas pressed. Joseph paused his tirade. He took a deep breath. How much have I told you about Marie-Josephine? Not much, Thomas said cautiously. She was the only woman I ever loved, Joseph admitted quietly. She was perfect in every way, except one. And what was that? Thomas asked, though everyone in Paris already knew. She was married. Joseph's voice grew softer. I'm sorry, Thomas replied, unsure what else to say. Generally, he would stand firmly against infidelity, but the look on his friend's face caused Thomas to shelve his religious pomposity. Joseph shook off the sentiment. Remember the night of our duel? When I trounced you? Thomas smirked, like it was yesterday. And do you remember how I disappeared for a month afterward? You joked that I was hiding in shame. I thought you were, Thomas laughed, but his expression sobered. Though I've heard the whispers. What do you know about what happened? Joseph asked. Only rumors, but I didn't want to give them credence, Thomas said. Marie-Josephine had a child, and the boy, let's just say, he didn't resemble her husband. Needless to say, it was rather easy for that stuffy baron to know who the father was. Joseph's voice was hard, but his eyes betrayed the pain. She was cast out, sent to England, and that night, the same night you won our duel, I was ambushed. Men hired by her husband, Baron Montalembert. Thomas thought back. A memory sparked in his mind, the group of men in the dark. I'm sorry, Montalembert is awful. They stood quiet for a moment. So you are a father? Thomas asked. You have a son. That's... Congratulations. No, Joseph said sadly. I mean, I am a father, but I have never met him. She was gone before I could... Frankly, my presence would have only made things worse for her. I'm sorry, Thomas replied. He didn't know what else to say. Joseph shrugged. Looks like those pompous idiots left you quite the shiner. Joseph pointed at the deep purple bruise on Thomas's jaw. Oh, I hadn't really stopped to notice, Thomas said, wincing slightly as he touched his chin. Mirrors are scarce in the Bastille. I suppose. You know you broke not one, but two of their noses, according to the gossip at the front desk. You made quite the impression. Really? Thomas chuckled. I was pretty sure with Blinken, but the other one too? On my honor you did, Joseph replied, laughing. Well, serves them fucking right, Thomas added. They are saying you threw him into the orchestra. I threatened to throw him into the orchestra, though perhaps that is the version I will tell my own son someday. That narrative is far more sensational, Thomas smiled. The talk of a son struck a nerve. Thomas really needed to learn better how to read the room. The Chevalier sighed. Learn from this, Thomas? Please, this city... You can rise as high as you imagine. You can be a marquis or chevalier and still be left dead to nothing in the gutter because they all have it out for you. You don't need to teach me that, Thomas responded, irritated. I have lived here. I feel it every day. I know, Joseph said softly. You walked away with only a bruise, but I lost everything. My chance at the National Opera and... Well, I needed a month to heal from my wounds, both to my body and to my heart. Didn't you perform a concert that same night? I did. It hurt like hell, the Chevalier puffed. But after that, well, you know, I disappeared. I understand, Thomas insisted, but I swear before you and God I will never kneel in front of another person again. Good. So don't be stupid, because I don't want to actually have to pay bail for you. You already took my horse, Joseph replied. That old thing could barely walk, Thomas retorted. Plus, I didn't take her, I won her, fair and square. She had sentimental value. Clearly, years and years and years of sentimental value, Thomas said snarkily. So, they didn't charge you a penny for bail. They were that scared of my father? Terrified, Joseph smirked. I think he is actually going to kill me. Probably, the Chevalier chuckled. And he would be right, too. They hailed a carriage back to Saint-Germain-en-Laye. As they drove up, Thomas turned to Joseph. I don't know if I can face him, Thomas said weakly. I doubt you have a choice in that matter, Joseph replied. Just take the beating and move on. Is that supposed to encourage me? Thomas asked, climbing out of the carriage. I'm not your governess, Joseph replied. He closed the carriage door behind him snappily and signaled the driver to ride away, leaving Thomas to face the inevitable, alone. The conversation with his father went rather as expected. Antoine was a shrewd businessman, and if anyone, including his own son, worked against his interests or tarnished his reputation in any way, there was no mercy. The insults were swift and sharp, each one as predictable as the next. You're a fool, Thomas Alexandre. I raised you better than this. I acted in defense of our family's honor, Thomas said. Honor? You think beating a man in the streets like some common thug defends our name? You've made a mockery of everything I've built. Do you realize how tirelessly I've worked to elevate you despite... Antoine gestured to Thomas, leaving the rest of the sentence to hang in the air like a knife. Why can I never be worthy of you? Because you are willing to throw everything away in the name of sentiment. I'm not ashamed of who I am, nor where I come from. Thomas began to storm out, but as he reached the door, Marie Retou was walking in, eyes full of prying curiosity. Excuse me, Thomas said flatly. As he left, Antoine gave him one final warning. If you don't start taking your station seriously, you will wish you stayed in prison.